Hi, I'm Max Keiser. This is the Keiser Report. Rally, rally, rally. Keep that rally going. Here we go. Dow Jones. What's going on?
Max, we're still here in Washington, D.C.
Oh, I noticed that. Yeah.
I got the red state look on.
Nice.
We're a red state nation now, thanks to,
Donald Trump.
If that's what you want to call him. And the first headline reads, Opinion, U.S. stocks riding a bull market in corruption. I think Max Keiser would probably say the stock markets are always a bull market in corruption. You, in fact, had that index trading, the Gulag index, the prison industrial complex Gulag index.
Yeah, this is no shock or no surprise, the fact that the Dow Jones reflects an enormous amount of corruption. I mean, take it all the way back to the Vietnam War. You had stock market participation of companies that were supporting the Vietnam War, but they were within the context of an overall bear market. So you did have underperformance by stocks up until 1982. Remember, there was a bear market for 16 years where the stock market did nothing. Then suddenly it caught fire in the summer of '82, and we're still in that bull market here. Many years later, it's long in the tooth. The bonds are at all-time highs. Stocks are recently been trading near or at all-time highs. And this is a cyclical phenomenon.
But the bond market is kind of turning.
The bond market has turned. Yields are going up. And so this is an interesting paradox because ultimately companies rely on the cost of funds, the interest rates they pay for funds, and if rates are going to go higher, that means their costs are going to go higher. We've already seen a breakdown in the pension industry. I think this will be one of the biggest crises of the Trump administration, will be the absolute failure of these huge pension pots that will collapse because of 10 years of artificially low interest rates now have left them essentially bankrupt. And this is, I think, going to be the trigger, I think, to set off an enormous problem.
Okay, so let's look at your opinion about this Tim Mullaney piece, where he thinks the stock market's booming right now, or since they have, through November, December, and early January, is that this is uniquely a sign of corruption and investors betting on corruption, because the recent rally is rooted mostly in corruption now and the promise of corruption later. And a rally built on corruption is bound to fail. Here's why. Financial stocks are responsible for much of the U.S. market's recent move, and the rally in financials is rooted in hopes for government deregulation of the industry. So financials represent about 1/3 of the S&P 500 and are up 17% since the election. If we take them out, there's actually no rally at all, and Trump or otherwise.
Well, look at Venezuela, one of the best performing stock markets of 2016, and the country's in collapse. Because for that very reason, people are gaming the system. They realize that there's money to be made by manipulating the stock market, and they are exploiting that to the fullest. Now, in terms of the U.S. stock market being mostly or predominantly or to a large degree financials, this is the result of neoliberalization going back to the Thatcher-Reagan era, where it was decided that when Reagan fired the air traffic controllers, he said, look, we don't care about labor anymore. We don't care about wages anymore. We're going to financially engineer an economy that bypasses inflation of wages, and we're only going to have inflation of assets. And, 80% of the stocks in America are owned by only 10% of the population. Okay, I'm talking about the entire population. Only 10% of Americans own 80% of these stocks. So they're fully invested in this experiment of financialization where working men and women were algebraically, financially engineered out of the system in favor of the wonks and the quarks and the quants on Wall Street. But this, too, is not a magic bowl of pudding, as I believe they think in Australia. They have the concept of the magic pudding, where you eat from the pudding bowl and it never diminishes. I could be completely wrong about this. Australian people help me out.
But I want to go back to this story because the point is that there is an old saying on Wall Street.
Oh, yes. Tell me about the old sayings on Wall Street.
And it is buy on mystery, sell on history. So the fact that markets, investors are buying right now, they're buying on the mystery of, they're basically selling Hillary. So they had expected, markets had priced in a Hillary win. Now, all the bankers invested in Hillary. All the pharmaceuticals invested in Hillary. Pharmaceuticals, as this guy points out, are also soaring. So I think, however, all of these people didn't realize that it was even a remote possibility that they would have a Republican-controlled Congress and Senate and White House. They never thought they would have it that good. They were hedging their bets, betting on Hillary, assuming she was the one that was going to inherit.
Right, on this buy on mystery, sell on history, Trump, could become the spec biotech stock of presidencies. What I mean by that is, a speculative biotech stock will say, we're working on clinical trials for a cure for cancer. And they have no assets at all. They have two guys in a white lab coat sitting in a university somewhere. And they go public, and the company's now worth $10 billion, $20 billion, $30 billion. And then 6 months later, they say, okay, we did the trials on this drug, and it came out, it doesn't work. And the stock evaporates and goes to zero. So this is buying on mystery, selling on history. The facts came out. They don't have the cure, and the stock went to zero. Same thing with Enron. Enron, people were bidding up that stock enormously on this magical earnings formula that they had.
Mystery, the black box.
The black box earnings formula that they had invented, where they financialized the energy industry, and they were financializing everything. They were going to financialize the entertainment industry. They were going to financialize everything under the sun, and it would all go through their magical financial futures contracts down there in Texas, and the stock was unstoppable. And then they came out that, they have no earnings, and they collapsed. $80 billion evaporated in one day. Trump's presidency could evaporate in a day because the stock market, everything he's doing is tied to the financials, tied to the stock market. If you have, like was the case in 2008, where one fund in France announced that one of their portfolios was mispriced and that it was actually not worth as much as they thought it was, that triggered the avalanche of selling orders that gave us the financial crisis of 2008. All Trump has to do is one day announce that, we've totally misguided and misjudged this deregulatory initiative we have for Wall Street, because it would possibly jack interest rates to a level that would cause extinction of the American economy, and you'll see the sell-off of all sell-offs.
In the meantime, pharmaceuticals are soaring, and this opinion maker, writer guy for MarketWatch says drug stocks appeal is no mystery. The market was afraid that Democratic presidential candidate Hillary Clinton would let Medicare negotiate drug prices with drug makers, as other nations do. So this is what I'm saying, is also there's bias in this guy's opinion, because Trump and his tweets, Trump tweeted in particular that we covered this, that he tweeted, why don't we negotiate drug prices? We're a big buyer. Why don't we just negotiate?
That's exactly an excellent point. He actually has said that he's going to look to negotiate drug prices.
And Hillary Clinton, by the way, here's a headline from June of last year, June 2016. Clinton outpaces rivals in drug company donations. So she took more money than all of the Republican candidates combined. In fact, they put the number at as of May of 2016, she had received $240,000 from executives at pharmaceutical companies to Donald Trump's $1,700.
This is an excellent point that he's telegraphing right now that he could be negotiating these prices. And, here's the problem with the stock market that's so highly leveraged, and why deregulating the banks, giving them the ability to buy stocks even on more leverage, greater margin leverage, greater debt, is that you end up in this environment where you've got the algorithmic trading on Wall Street. They read the fake news generated by the financial press, and they'll pick up a story like, oh, pharmaceuticals are a dead certain buy because of the anticipation of rolling back all of these Clinton initiatives. Even though that's fake and it's false, the news picks it up. And the algorithmic traders on Wall Street, the computers, they're not humans, they read that and they start buying pharmaceutical stocks. And then pension fund managers are all over the country and all over the world see the prices going up. And they're like, oh my God, I'm at the end of the quarter, if I'm not keeping up with these other pension fund performance managers, I'm going to be out of a job. So I'm going to buy these pharmaceutical stocks too. So this little this little misinformation becomes exaggerated into a multi-$100 billion stock move. And then the history or the news, the reality hits, and there's a trap door. They say stocks climb up the stairs, they climb up the stairwell, and they fall down the elevator shaft. I mean, that's the history of the stock market.
So back to the story from June 2016 and trying to understand the markets today where pharmaceuticals are soaring. Here, Hillary Clinton had received $240,000 just from executives at pharmaceuticals versus $1,700 for Trump. By the way, at the same point, Obama had received 500,000, so double what Hillary had received. So what the analysis from CNN Money at the time had been about why they were going long, why they were betting on Hillary, was industry insiders say the sector may be drawn to Clinton for a few reasons. She has a good chance of winning against Trump in November. Her policies are relatively transparent and predictable, and she's more supportive of international trade than rivals. Again, exposing the truth about those TPP and TTIP deals are just intellectual property constraints on anybody else competing with the U.S. pharmaceutical giants. That's what they were betting on. And yet now they have the mystery of Trump, and what nobody knows what his policies are except for a few tweets that he sends out that instant, that moment, that flash crash day.
The stage is set for an enormous volatility. I think, there is a measure of volatility on Wall Street. It's called the Volatility Index, or a VIX. And as our friend Mitch Firestein has pointed out many times, the volatility index, just like stocks, bonds, currencies, is manipulated down to give fake prices. Again, to my theme of fake prices precede fake news. And once the volatility index is allowed to trade freely and reflect the genuine volatility in these markets, this will have an outsized effect on the price movements. And with the markets trading at these stretched valuations, you're going to see very, very wild swings in prices.
Now, quickly on the last headline about, again, looking at the same data, but having different opinions. And it all depends on your own subjective reality, because new census data shows why the job market is still terrible, as Trump said, but the numbers get hushed up. So Donald Trump campaigned on how terrible the job situation was, while the Obama administration touted the jobs growth since the employment bottomed out in the Great Recession in 2010. It sounded like they were talking about two entirely different economies at different ends of the world, but they weren't. Statistically speaking, they were both right, because the population has increased by 16 million since 2010, and yet there were over 14 million jobs created. Still a shortage in the number of people of working age entering the market. So,
yeah, and most of the jobs, over 90%, were part-time jobs or low-paid jobs or minimum wage jobs.
You could look at the same data, and you could price it either way. Buy on mystery, sell.
Right. I mean, our job as journalists is to point out what we see to be the truth. But many times, if we're fed garbage information, like from the U.S. government, Bureau of Labor Statistics is a notorious garbage-feeding, organ of the federal government, you end up reporting on misinformation because the government gave you junk information. But the consumer of information needs to, keep their eyes open and keep alert. It's their job, just like any consumer of anything, needs to, carpe diem.
I'm consuming this information. Woo!
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, we'll see where that ends up in the second half. So stay tuned. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time to continue my discussion with Tyson Slocum. He's the Director of Public Citizens Energy Program here in Washington, D.C. Welcome back, Tyson.
Thank you.
All right, well, we were getting into some heavy stuff. The last segment, we need to get back into it. We were discussing the various conflict of interest that Rex Tillerson would have, making the transition from Exxon to Secretary of State. And we were talking about monopolies in America and the monopolistic interests that are represented by a handful of monopolistic giants in America. And it's tough to get away from that. And when I hear Donald Trump tweet that he's going to look at some of these deals, like the Time Warner, AT&T, I think that's the deal, shades of Teddy Roosevelt, the trust buster. We don't know exactly what's going to happen yet. It looks bad, but we don't know.
No one really knows.
We don't
the
know.
detail.
It looks bad, but we don't know. I mean, so what are your thoughts in terms of this? My point being that, Rex Tillerson looks like a terrible choice, but like the whole system is screwed up. Is there a possibility that there could be like a reform in the style of the Teddy Roosevelt reform we saw?
There's absolutely a possibility. The challenges are that Trump is likely going to delegate a lot of sweeping authorities to his various cabinet level picks. And so it's going to matter a lot who he puts in charge. And the problem is the people that he's put in charge look worse than the status quo. I do think that Trump has some very interesting tendencies that are sort of populist. You know, he was in the Manhattan business scene, but he was never accepted by Wall Street. He never really hobnobbed with the big Fortune 500 CEOs. And so he's a little distrustful. He wasn't in their world. But so far, a lot of his cabinet picks look like the Fortune 500.
He was a bit of an outsider, even in the developing world.
He was.
His dad, Fred, I guess, they started out in the burb, the Queens.
Right.
And they had a lot of development. In New York, Manhattan was always the holy grail, but it was a bit of an insider's club.
Absolutely.
And then during the 70s, when New York City went bankrupt, he kind of stepped in, and they did some hotel deals at that time, I guess, when nobody else wanted to, and he stepped up. And he planted his flag in Manhattan. But he kind of remained that outsider. And I think he's carrying that to the White House now, saying, even though I'm a rich guy, I never go through Goldman Sachs. I'm not Jamie Dimon. I'm still kind of a renegade. So you think there might be taking that into the White House a bit, and he can push back against these guys?
He might.
Yeah.
But the problem is that there's a lot that Donald Trump doesn't know about. And for the things that he doesn't know about, he's going to rely on this circle of campaign contributors and other advisors. So let's take energy policy, for example. His number one advisor during the campaign on energy policy was an oil company CEO by the name of Harold Hamm, who runs Continental Resources, one of the largest companies engaged in oil fracking in the United States. So Trump, during the campaign and even during the transition period, has been talking about the need to produce more oil, to frack more natural gas, to get coal mines back up and running. And he's been poo-pooing the ability of renewable energy to meet our needs.
Okay, let me ask you this question. So you were your organization there, started by Ralph Nader, the Public Citizens Energy Program. He wrote a book, I think it was called "Let the Billionaires Work It Out."
Trump
No,
said that,
Ralph Nader.
Ralph Nader did.
Ralph Nader. He said, let's go get a bunch of billionaires together and solve all these problems. Only the billionaires can save us now, I think was the title of the book or something.
Right, it was a work of fiction, though. It was.
No, he was serious about it.
He was serious?
Yeah.
I haven't read that.
So here's
one.
a billionaire in the Trump White House.
Right.
So let me give you a hypothetical on this
Right.
huge energy combine.
Mm-hmm.
This could be completely crazy thoughts, but obviously there's been a lot of talk in terms of the relationship with Russia,
Mm-hmm.
with Trump, with Putin, with the whole energy business, and it seems. Let me ask you this: there is an area of common interest where Russia and the U.S. can work together, and that is to fight terrorism.
Oh, absolutely.
Nobody really argues that point.
They should, because that's something, Russia's been dealing with it for a very long time, and Russia has pretty advanced intelligence services.
So the U.S. and Russia,
forces,
if they get together, they can probably do a lot to fight terrorism, I
think successfully.
Successfully.
Mm-hmm.
So if the U.S. and Russia get together and they're fighting terrorism, and then they're looking at the energy patch, isn't the big loser in that alliance Saudi Arabia?
It is, and I have always been skeptical of the United States' long-standing partnership with the Saudis. I don't see that the
Saudis are out there
Saudis
beheading people.
Right.
Saudis, they don't have a policy that maybe is not overly favorable toward the gay community. They frickin' behead gays every day. They're terrorists.
And the last time I checked, the FBI still didn't want to declassify the 9/11 report that talked about links between Saudi royal family members and financing of the 9/11
the
terrorist
hobbyism of the Sunnis in the Saudi kingdom are seemingly the fountainhead of global terrorism.
Absolutely, and so
as the energy patch, here you have Rex Tillerson, who is the number one energy guy in the world, is Secretary of State. He's with Trump and Putin, and they're like, you know what? Why don't the three of us just kind of figure out, and we'll just get Saudis. Push them out of the way, and they'll lose their dominance. Their OPEC loses complete ability to price oil. They no longer become the swing vote in the OPEC, and the energy, and they get screwed. Isn't that a positive outcome?
Well, I don't necessarily know that will be the outcome. You have to remember that.
But if that were the outcome, and isn't the table set for something like that? You can't imagine John Kerry doing a deal like that, because John Kerry is a career diplomat. He doesn't know jack.
Maybe if it was just Trump calling the shot, but again, like I said, a lot of these key decisions are going to be carried out by Trump surrogates. look who the biggest backers are of Rex Tillerson for Secretary of State. It's Dick Cheney and George W. Bush, right? They both know Tillerson. They've worked with him. And Tillerson is all about how can the United States maximize economic opportunities around the
Right,
world.
and as you point out, I think correctly, the legacy industry in hydrocarbon is heading toward extinction. Why, is there a possibility that somebody from the left, let's say Michael Moore shows up in the White House along with a whole troop, Nancy Pelosi and Arianna Huffington, and they arrive in the West Wing and they go, and they throw perspectives on Trump's desk. It's a big fat perspective. It's called American Solar Renewal Project. And they point out how solar arrays in the desert in America will create 500,000 jobs, totally, they lay it all out as a business proposition. And Trump, why wouldn't he look, he would look at that and he would say, you know what, this makes good business sense. And so my question is this, shouldn't the left spend less time outside with placards, protesting, picking their nose, and spend more time coming up with a counterproposal?
Right, absolutely. There's no question that renewable energy is the winning bet at this point to power not just the U.S. economy, but the global economy. But again, the gatekeepers to Donald Trump, you're not going to be able to just get into the White House with this proposal. You're going to have to go through Rick Perry, who Donald Trump just nominated to serve as Secretary of Energy. Rick Perry was the governor of Texas. He is extremely tight with the oil and gas production industry in Texas. And so that's a problem. And when you look at Rex Tillerson, this is a guy, Exxon has not invested in renewables.
But we live in an age where the gatekeepers are also become extinct. The mainstream media used to be a gatekeeper, and now they're gone. People are tweeting from the wing of a downed plane in the middle of the Hudson 2 hours before CNBC shows up. Right?
Well,
there's no gatekeepers. If enough people are out there on social media and out there, they're saying, here's our perspectives, here's it all on the internet, here's 20 million people, Trump, look at this, there's no gatekeepers.
Well,
so again, it seems like you're pre-cooking the excuse. I mean...
No, it's just that the oil industry has considerably more financial and political resources than the corporate media industry did. And so while we've seen decentralization and disintegration of mainstream corporate media in the United States, you're not seeing big oil go down without a pretty serious fight. And all across the country, in state legislatures and in other venues, the incumbent energy industry is fighting for its life, and it's typically winning, right? Even though they're on the losing bet of an issue, it's because they've got such massive political and economic capital invested into our political process. And we've got a political process that is privately financed, and because of the 2010 Citizens United decision, corporations are able to, behind the scenes, really heavily influence the operations of our government and our elections. And
but they're still tying their wagon to an industry that is dying.
Absolutely.
So their power is going to shrink like the Wicked Witch of the West.
It is, but the question is that transition going to happen because the market is going to allow it, or are the fossil fuel industry going to continue to run interference?
Historically, when you have this type of entrenched oligopoly clinging to power, they go to war.
Well, I hope that isn't what it comes to.
Isn't that an outcome a lot of times? I mean, we saw it in World War I, World War II. You saw the players decided that they didn't want to give up their empires, so they went to war. We have a global empire of oil industry companies and kingdoms who, and certainly in the case of Saudi Arabia, is willing to blow up 2 towers in New York to hold on to power. The Congress is complicit by not showing 28 pages of redacted information. So there's obviously tyrants in the White House and in Congress and in Washington, D.C. who are complicit in that act.
No, you're absolutely right.
So, I mean, and that's a prelude to war. That's a warlike act of war.
Right. And it's why commodity diplomacy is no longer relevant in the 21st century.
War is expensive.
It's extremely expensive.
And Trump is a cheap dude. He's cheap. I'm staying in his frickin' hotel here in D.C. and it looks nice, but he's cutting corners. Let me tell you, some of the marble in the bathroom is not exactly up to standards I would thought it would be.
Trump is
he's a bit of a cheapskate, that guy.
He's the king of it.
War is cheap. It's expensive, and he's talking to like Scrooge. Scrooge, he doesn't want to go to war.
Right.
It's too expensive.
The only concern I see with the ascent of renewables is if this corporate Supreme Court changes the law to allow a company like Exxon to control patent rights over sunshine or the wind blowing.
Right. Well, it gets into a whole other story. I've said for many years that the trademark and patents are really the key activist issue that tie all activist issues because it's essentially the trying to attempt to control your thoughts, essentially. And,
right.
That's the worst. But anyway, this has been fantastic. I hope you come back on again soon.
Anytime.
Thanks so much.
My pleasure.
All right, well, that's it for this edition of the Keiser Report. With me, Max Keiser, and Stacey Herbert. I'd like to thank Tyson Slocum. He's the Director of Public Citizens Energy Program right here in Washington, D.C. You want to find us on Twitter? Keiser Report. Or just send up a big signal in the sky. I'll come to your house and do the show at your living room table. Until next time, bye, y'all.